My girlfriend of 2 years cheated and I didn't find out till she was engaged 3 months later, but I got the last laugh. There will be no names in this story because I don't want anyone else to know about it. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video so you don't miss any interesting stories. So how did it all start? I first crossed paths with my ex while we were both in college. I was 24 at the time, and she was 22. Before meeting her, I hadn't really been in many relationships. In fact, I'd just come out of a messy, year-long relationship that, while unhealthy, ended on decent terms. That girl had been deeply depressed. I cared about her, loved her, even, but her sadness was so heavy it started to weigh me down. I like to think of myself as someone who feels things deeply, and being around her constant sorrow drained me. Eventually, I had to walk away. My ex and I first connected because we lived in the same apartment complex. I'd helped her out a couple of times, little things really, but the real turning point came when she asked me for a ride. That simple favor sparked a friendship, and before long, that friendship turned into something more. I found myself spending hours with her, whether she was hanging around her place or working late shifts at the sandwich shop. She had taken a break from school, partly because of depression and partly due to a broken engagement from the year before. As far as I know, she never actually finished her degree, bouncing between a couple of different universities along the way. We grew closer, in part, because of the stories she shared about her ex, how he betrayed her and cheated. Back then I believed every word of it, though now I can't help but wonder how much of it was true. Either way, it brought us together. Within 2 months, we were practically inseparable. She even introduced me to her parents, though technically, we were still just friends with benefits at that point. After a few months, I wanted to make things official. I wasn't interested in seeing anyone else, and as far as I knew, she wasn't either. But when I brought it up, she turned me down. Said she wasn't ready for a relationship because of her past engagement. Looking back, that probably should have been my first warning sign, but I brushed it off. I figured she'd come around. We kept seeing each other exclusively anyway, so I thought it was only a matter of time. About a month later, I brought it up again. If we were already acting like a couple, why not just call it what it was? But once again, she resisted. When things were good, they felt effortless. She seemed to share my interests, our goals lined up, and for a while, it felt like we just fit together. But there were cracks too. Little jabs she'd make about me, comparing me to her exes, sometimes out of nowhere. We'd get into arguments over the smallest things, and whenever I tried to smooth things over, she'd shut me down. More than once, she'd storm out of my apartment in the middle of a fight. At first, I'd chase after her, worried and wanting to fix things. But that only made her angrier. She'd tell me to give her space. So, the next time it happened, I let her go. And then she'd accuse me of not caring enough to follow her. At some point, she started twisting my memories, insisting I was wrong about things I clearly remembered her saying. Back then, I didn't even know what gaslighting was, but looking back, that's exactly what she was doing. Still, I let it slide. I was too caught up in her to question it. Friends of mine didn't hold back, though. Whenever I mentioned her, they'd tell me I deserved better, that she didn't treat me right. I should have listened. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that your friends usually have your best interests at heart. But at the time, I brushed off their concerns, convincing myself they didn't see the whole picture. A year into our relationship, I was still asking to make things official. And every time, she held firm, always with the same excuse that she wasn't ready. Yet, she'd also tell me I was the best guy she'd ever dated. All her friends knew we were together, but truth be told, I wasn't a fan of them. Whenever she invited me to hang out with her group, I'd make an excuse. They felt cliquish, and that just wasn't my scene. Plus, they had a cat, and since I'm allergic, it was an easy out. Despite the weirdness, our relationship continued to move forward. We went on dates regularly, and every night she'd call me. We'd stay on the phone until one of us fell asleep, and sometimes the call would still be going the next morning. She told me that my presence was comforting, that I helped her sleep through the depression she was battling. But things weren't always smooth. Every now and then, things would take a turn, and she'd cross the line, sometimes even physically. Twice she slapped me. Not during arguments, but because she thought it was funny. Both times, I made it clear that it wasn't. I told her flat out that I would never do that to her, and I expected the same respect in return. But the biggest gut punch came during one of our fights when she said, "My roommate knows all the guys in the complex who'd be down for an Ansimo, so I don't really need you." It stung, a lot more than I let on. Finally, after a little over a year of this back and forth, she caved and agreed to be my girlfriend. I thought I'd won. But even then, something felt off. She barely told anyone. Outside of her family, it was like our relationship was still some kind of secret. I probably should have questioned it, but at the time, I was too focused on the fact that I'd finally gotten the commitment I'd been chasing. I'm going to be upfront here. There were definitely times when I wasn't the perfect partner. I struggle with depression myself, and juggling work, school, family pressures, and our relationship sometimes pushed me over the edge. I never hurt her, but I did lose my temper on occasion. When I did, I'd point out the ways she had hurt me, hoping she'd understand where I was coming from. We broke up more than once. Sometimes I ended things, sometimes she did, but no matter how many times we walked away, one of us always came back. I won't sugarcoat it. There was a point when I acted out in a manipulative way. I was so overwhelmed by the pain of our relationship that I self-harmed to show her how much I was hurting. I'm not proud of it. She had also self-harmed and talked about feeling suicidal while we were together, and if I'm being honest, the idea came from her. Despite everything, I was deeply in love with her. She told me she loved me too. We talked about the future, marriage, kids, where we'd live. It all felt real. During this time, she moved twice. First, it was just down the street to another apartment, and then later, she moved back to her parents' place about an hour north. When she was living in that apartment nearby, she threw a party. After everyone else left, I stayed behind to help her clean. None of her friends stuck around. I remember her telling me that night that my willingness to help proved I'd make a good husband. Once she moved back in with her parents, I still made the effort to visit her almost every week. But as time passed, I started to feel a shift. She grew distant. Her texts and calls became less frequent, and when she did respond, it was slower than usual. Funny thing was, if she reached out to me, she expected a quick reply, no matter how busy I was. And I delivered. If she needed me, I showed up, even if it was 1 a.m. and I had work and school the next day. After a couple of months of this, I started bringing up the idea of getting engaged. But just like with the whole boyfriend-girlfriend thing, she kept dodging it. Once again, she leaned on her past relationship and depression as reasons she wasn't ready. And then, out of nowhere, she suggested we go back to casually dating. This was, without a doubt, the dumbest thing I ever agreed to, but I did. I thought maybe if I gave her space, she'd realize I was the guy for her. Over the next few months, she went on other dates. She'd even tell me about them, always following up with how much better I was than any of those other guys. Meanwhile, I didn't see anyone else. I was too hooked on her to even try. I did tell her, though, if she found someone else she wanted to be with, I'd walk away and let her pursue him. Eventually, after some long talks with my friends and family, reality hit me. Why was I bending over backward for someone who wasn't even my girlfriend anymore? So, I told her how I felt. She agreed, and we decided that any physical part of our relationship was off the table until we were exclusive again. Except, nothing really changed. We still went on dates, and every time, she would pressure me, guilt-tripping me until I caved. And when I did, she'd flip. She'd get angry, accusing me of not having enough self-control. "Why couldn't you resist?" she'd ask. "Why didn't you stop me?" It was confusing, and honestly, it was exhausting. Her words became more cruel over time. The harshest thing she ever said was that if she got pregnant, she'd never tell me, and that the decision about what to do would be hers alone. That cut deep. Being a father had always meant something to me. The idea that she'd shut me out like that, as if I didn't matter, broke something inside me. But instead of walking away, we'd argue, then somehow fall back into each other's arms. Despite the tension, we kept talking about a future together. Sometimes, when she spotted a mixed baby, me being Latino and her being white, she'd comment on how adorable the baby was, hinting that it could have been ours. And when the weight of her depression hit, she'd ask me, "Would you still marry me?" Every time, without hesitation, I'd reassure her, "Of course I would. I love you." It wasn't until Christmas, while I was visiting my brother in Florida, that I started to feel like something was seriously off. I texted her, no reply. I called, hoping for our usual late-night chats, but she'd ignore my calls. Then, out of the blue, she rang me one evening, not to talk or check in, but to ask if I had a certain movie on DVD. When I asked why, she casually said she wanted to watch it with her family. But something in her voice, something in the way she brushed off my questions, felt wrong. When I got back from vacation and the new semester started, she showed up at my university. Not to visit me, exactly. She'd come for some other reason but ended up calling because she'd lost her Fitbit and wanted my help finding it. I dropped everything to help her, and we spent some time together. But the whole time, I could feel it, something between us had shifted. She wasn't the same. Before she left, she asked me to come visit her at her parents' house in 2 days. She said she had something important to talk about. And right then I knew. I knew what was coming. I talked things over with a couple of my friends, bracing myself for the worst. When I arrived at her parents' house, it was already late. She had asked me to come by around 10 p.m. She slipped into my car, and we sat there talking for about half an hour, maybe a little longer. That's when she told me she didn't want to be with me anymore. And honestly, I agreed. I admitted that I had felt the distance growing between us, and I straight up asked if there was someone else. She denied it. Said there wasn't anybody else, just that she no longer believed we were right for each other. But then she kept talking. She told me she never actually considered me husband material, that she never saw us getting married or having a family. Worse, she claimed she had known it from the beginning. And if that wasn't enough, she added another gut punch. One of the reasons she didn't want to be with me was because our kids wouldn't look like her. A jab at me being Latino while she was white. Funny enough, these days she loves to brag about how progressive and open-minded she is. Yeah, sure. Hearing her say all that floored me. It felt like everything we'd planned, every time she'd asked if I'd marry her, every conversation about our future kids, was just a lie. And that cut deep. Still, as much as it hurt, I told her I loved her, but agreed we were done. We decided on a clean break, no contact. She even insisted on blocking me on Facebook, claiming that if I did it, I'd probably unblock her eventually, so it was better if she handled it. I let her. The only thing we didn't block was our phones, just in case of an emergency, especially since I didn't have any family nearby. As I drove away from her house that night, sadness hung heavy in my chest, but strangely, I also felt like a massive weight had finally been lifted. The following month was rough. Nights were the worst. I realized just how much I had come to rely on her. Her constant calls, the late-night talks. I had grown codependent without even noticing it. Now, without that connection, I felt completely alone. There were nights I found myself curled up on my bedroom floor, overwhelmed by the emptiness. But I pushed through. I buried myself in work, focused on school, and leaned on my friends to keep moving forward. Then, about a month later, my phone rang early one morning. It was her. My heart jumped. I thought maybe something had happened. But when I answered, there was no emergency. Instead, it seemed like she had but dialed me. At first, it didn't make sense. What were the odds of her accidentally calling me after a whole month of silence? I could hear faint voices in the background, hers, and another voice I didn't recognize. It was definitely a guy. I only caught pieces of their conversation, something about snow, and I swear I heard my name mentioned, but before I could make sense of it, the call ended. I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the best of me. I reached out to a few mutual friends and found out she had started dating someone new. Again, against my better judgment, I sent her a message asking if she was okay. It took a few days, but she eventually replied. She confirmed the betrayal but admitted that, deep down, she had wanted to talk to me. She told me she missed our friendship, and for a few minutes, it felt like old times, like nothing had changed. But then she mentioned her new boyfriend. I told her I already knew, and she seemed surprised, asking how I had found out. I told her I'd heard from friends. I had already seen a picture of the guy, but I didn't tell her that. Instead, I just listened as she started pointing out his flaws, like she was trying to justify things. At one point, she made a comment about his hair being weird. I agreed, saying, "Yeah, it is a bit." But that set her off. Apparently, she had been talking about how his hair looked years ago, and she immediately grew suspicious, asking how I knew what his hair used to look like. I quickly backpedaled, saying I thought she meant now. Before we wrapped up the conversation, she mentioned something else strange. She said she had been receiving a bunch of random friend requests on Facebook and wanted to know if they were from me. They weren't. We said our goodbyes after that, but something about the whole thing left me feeling off. At first, part of me was happy for her, thinking maybe she was moving on. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. And deep down, I realized I didn't want to keep talking to her anymore. The next day, I sent her a message. I told her that while I enjoyed talking like we used to, it was best if we stuck to our no-contact agreement. She agreed, and after that, I went ahead and blocked her number. About a week later, while I was on campus, I noticed I had a voicemail. Oddly enough, my phone never rang. It was from her. She asked if I was home because she had stopped by to drop off a few things. That irritated me. As far as I was concerned, there was nothing important enough to return, and it bugged me even more that she had come by unannounced and left the stuff at my front door when no one was home. I was fed up. I had made it clear that I wanted no further contact. So, I decided to write her an email. In it, I laid everything out. I told her that I had genuinely loved her, but she had mistreated me in so many ways, lying to me, manipulating me, and I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. I also thanked her parents for being kind to me throughout our relationship. Honestly, they had always treated me well, and they often told me how lucky she was to have me. Then, I got straight to the point. I told her I wanted absolutely no further contact. I informed her that she was now blocked on my phone. I also acknowledged that, despite living an hour apart, we could still cross paths since I had mutual friends in her area. I wrapped up the email with one last statement. The way you treat me is how I'll treat you if we ever see each other. If you treat me like a friend, I'll treat you like a friend. If you treat me like an enemy, I'll treat you like an enemy. And if you act like I don't exist, then I'll act like you don't exist. I hit send and figured that was the end of it. I thought I'd never hear from her again. But oh boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I received a reply, but not from her. It was from her dad. And to make things even more intimidating, her dad was a former Marine and a lawyer. His email was as aggressive as you'd expect. He told me, in no uncertain terms, to stay away from his daughter. He accused me of stalking her, a pretty wild claim considering I was an hour away, focused on school, work, and my friends. He also said I was creating fake Facebook accounts to spy on her. For the record, I never did that. Sure, I had peeked at her profile a couple of times through a friend's account. Who hasn't? But that was it. What really got me, though, was that he took the part of my email where I said I'd treat her the way she treated me and twisted it. He highlighted that line and claimed, "I consider this a threat." He ended his email by warning me that if I didn't leave his daughter alone, he'd pursue a restraining order against me. I was stunned. Her dad and I had always gotten along. I couldn't believe he was coming at me like this. I talked to a few friends and, drawing on the legal knowledge I'd picked up during my university studies, decided to respond. I kept my tone firm but calm. I told him plainly that I wanted nothing to do with his daughter. I reminded him that she had been the one to re-establish contact, not me. In fact, I pointed out that she had even come to my house without warning just the week before. If I were some dangerous stalker, why would she willingly come to my doorstep? I also made it clear that his claims were baseless. No judge in their right mind would grant a restraining order based on what he had written. Finally, I ended my email by telling him that I wanted no further communication with either him or his daughter, and I expected them to extend me the same courtesy. After the email exchange with her father, I was left reeling. What kind of twisted story had she been spreading about me? Why was she portraying me as some kind of obsessed stalker? I confided in a few close friends, and their reaction was unanimous. They were stunned. Most of them just shook their heads and told me I had dodged a nuke. Looking back, they were absolutely right. I figured that was the end of it. We had cut all contact, and I assumed our story was over. But as you already know, this is a cheating story, a long and complicated one at that. We had officially broken up in January. Then, just after the first week of April, a friend messaged me while I was at work. "Hey, did you know your ex just got engaged?" they asked. I was floored. It had only been 3 months. This was the same girl who constantly claimed how difficult relationships were for her because of her abusive ex-fiancé who had cheated on her. The timeline didn't add up, but what really caught my attention was a comment someone left on her engagement post. The commenter congratulated her and mentioned how happy they were to have helped her and her new fiancé get together, back in November, while she and I were still seeing each other. Sure, we weren't technically exclusive at that point, but I had given her multiple chances to end things if someone else was in the picture, and she had flat out lied to me. That, in my book, was cheating. Suddenly, everything clicked. Her distant behavior during Christmas. The weird phone call about the movie. It had all been because of him. The realization stung, but life went on. I was still struggling with depression and trying to work through the lingering trust issues she'd left me with. I confided in more people, friends, even some folks from my church, and the more I shared, the more I learned about her. People who had known her, but didn't realize we had dated, came forward with stories. And wow, did I learn a lot. It turned out she had a long history of bad-mouthing others behind their backs. The sweet, caring persona she had shown me? It was just an act. She never really loved me, she loved the attention, the care, the comfort. Once someone better came along, I was discarded. I realized that I had fallen in love not with who she actually was, but with who she pretended to be. She had heard I was a nice guy, an empath, and she knew I was easy to manipulate. All she did was mirror my personality back at me, and I mistook it for genuine connection. As painful as it was, the experience taught me a lot about myself. I learned that I care too much, that I love too deeply, and, most importantly, that I need to be more careful about who I give my heart to. Lesson learned. About 6 months passed, and while I hadn't personally run into her, I heard she had moved back to my city with her new husband. So much for me being the stalker. Right. Some of my friends had a few run-ins with her, and one even managed to embarrass her by making a not-so-subtle sexual innuendo about something she'd done. Poetic justice, I guess. I got invited to a friend's wedding. I couldn't make it to the ceremony, but I showed up for the reception. Just as I was finishing a speech poking fun at my buddy, his laugh was so obnoxious, you wouldn't believe, I was about to sit down when a familiar face appeared. A mutual friend was walking into the room, and right behind her, my ex and her husband. Our eyes met for a brief moment. Instead of stepping into the room, she immediately pushed her husband back into the hallway and followed after him, out of sight. I stood there, surprised. For a moment, I stepped outside to the far side of the building to gather myself. Truthfully, I felt fine, just shocked to see her after all that time. After a few minutes, I returned to the reception and noticed they still hadn't come in. Curious, I asked the groom if he had invited her. He said he had but didn't think to mention it to me. I told him a heads-up would have been nice, but whatever, he wasn't exactly a close friend, just someone connected to my inner circle. A little while later, the couple was about to have their first dance, so we started clearing some chairs. I happened to be near one of the doors, moving a stack of them, when my ex suddenly walked through that exact door. The second she saw me standing right there, she darted to the other side of the room with her husband trailing behind her. The rest of the reception? We avoided each other completely, just a couple of quick glances, but nothing more. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. For months after the breakup, I felt broken, like a piece of myself was missing. But seeing her that night? Watching her practically run away from me, like she couldn't even face me? I felt whole again. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt powerful. I felt free. Even though she was the one who ended up married and I was still single, I knew I had won the breakup. She was the one too ashamed to even look me in the eye. Meanwhile, I stood there with a clear conscience and no regrets. And now here I am, more than 4 years later, writing this. Life isn't perfect, but I'm happy. And Maddie? If you ever read this, fuck you. I'm the one who finished university while you're stuck being a housewife. All that talk about changing the world? The only thing you'll be changing is dirty diapers. At the end of the day, you're nothing but a liar and a cheat.